everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. I'll start with a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So I hope you've had a really good lunch. Thanks again for attending this session. And I hope that you're enjoying this year's GDC and, of course, San Francisco. So I'm here today to discuss how we devised and released the UX redesign for the live mobile game War Dragons last year. During this session, we'll cover the importance of creating a vision, establishing a clear design rationale, community involvement, utilizing a phased rollout plan for changes for a live product, and the testing methods used and how we remain data-informed to insist in our key decisions. So hopefully this all sounds great, but before I launch into that, here's a quick bio so that you know who I am. So I'm James, and I work at Pocket Gems here in downtown SF as the Director of UX. I joined the industry back in 2002, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some outstanding teams on some really awesome IP over the years. I've worked at companies that include EA, Disney, LucasArts, Rumble, and of course, Pocket Gems. So the current Pocket Gems stable of games includes War Dragons, that we're going to talk about, the award-winning Episode, and the recently launched Wild Beyond. Now, needless to say that without the great team over there at Pocket Gems, this talk wouldn't be possible. So now you've got a little more context about myself, let's just get on with this talk. So War Dragons. War Dragons was launched in 2015. It's a 3D real-time PvP title and has had 27 million and counting installs to date. Now, we're very fortunate to have a truly passionate player base in our games that interact with each other on a daily basis. And just to illustrate how passionate the players are, here's some quick facts about them. Typically, players run over 20 battles per day on average. That's roughly about a 3-minute battle. And 20% of players in the top leagues have never missed a war battle for their entire time in the game. That's really quite incredible when you stop to think about it. We even have players that have married one another who met through the game's social features. So it was evident that we had a game that people played and clearly loved, then why did we want to redesign the UX? So we held stakeholder interviews, and a common opinion that we heard was that the game was inconsistent to navigate and in places complicated to understand. As I've explained, the game was created in 2015, which in mobile terms might as well have been from a previous console generation. Now, there was a real desire to improve, simplify, and standardize how our players could access the game content. As we observed players interact with the product in person, it was like watching a game of digital table tennis as their hands just zipped across the phone, accessing numerous buttons placed in varying positions to navigate the screens. It was tiring enough just to watch this happen, let alone have to do it. Now, with the addition of new features, the original screens and flows had become, well, muddled. Now, if you've ever worked on a live mobile product that has run for a few years, then this scenario is likely going to sound familiar to you. Products evolve, and systems that made complete sense at launch can lose their cohesion and effectiveness over time as new content gets added. Now, our testing confirmed that it was easy for new players to become disorientated, and we wanted to help ease that burden. Now, via competitive research, we had identified common patterns in the most successful titles. We realized that they shared consistent mobile design patterns, especially in regards to their navigation, and our product didn't do this in its current form. The older screens we had in the game were often inefficiently using screen space, which in places resulted in barely legible content. There was an over-reliance on fixed-width stacking pop-ups and overlays that didn't utilize the full screen space available. So applying the principles established by Jacob Nielsen in Jacob's Law, we aim to simplify the learning process for our users by providing familiar design patterns in our suggested redesign. We believed that we could adopt and implement those proven mobile design patterns into our game and significantly improve the UX as a whole. So we'd identified why we believed a redesign was worthwhile, and this allowed us to craft a vision. And this enabled the entire team to understand what we were hoping to achieve. We wanted to have more engaged players. We wanted improved accessibility to core content. We wanted structured and predictable navigation within the game. We hoped we would find performance improvements too, and definitely an upswing in early player retention, and a familiar yet improved experience for existing players. This was a fairly compelling argument, and there was consensus buy-in across the team. We felt that if we delivered upon all of those components, the product would be better and the players would experience this and therefore would accept it. But first, let's be clear, there was a definite risk involved with this. Because the product was live and had been in operation for some years and with a passionate player base, we were very cautious not to do something that would result in elder player angst and eventual churn. We wanted to make sure that changes we planned made sense and were of value to the players. And that is why we targeted simple quality of life improvements alongside the underlying navigation restructuring work. We equally wanted to make sure that we were not changing the best parts of the game so as to lose our players. Understanding our players was imperative as we were about to change their game, so communication would be key both internally and externally in order for this to succeed. First, we needed a plan. Now, as this was a financially successful live mobile title, there was a lot at stake should we not succeed. The nature of the changes we had planned made the logistics of delivering the redesign into our players' hands a real challenge. The team had to balance continuing to support our existing players in the live product whilst concurrently designing and building the redesign screens in the background. To best avoid player meltdown and a broken game, we decided upon utilizing a plan which used the approaches of discover, explore, test, and listen to help. We identified key practices in each of these stages and then devised a phased rollout plan that would enable us to receive player feedback at regular intervals. If at any time it looked like we were in trouble, we have a collective understanding that we would first try to address the issues, and if all else failed, we'd pull the plug on the redesign and focus elsewhere. So this slide introduces the phase rollout plan, and as you can see, the phases included concept, engineering phase 1 and phase 2, internal Pocket Gems and external testing, Android release, which was our iOS pilot, and then finally the worldwide release. Now, the key idea of the rollout was to allow us to get feedback on the planned changes at multiple different stages of the development and to review it to catch any show-stopping issues. Each phase of the timeline saw an intentional increase in the amount of users that we would receive feedback from. Now, in the concept phase, this is when we began exploring and establishing the design patterns for the redesign. We'd identified the existing product relied on an overuse of pop-ups, and our intention was to replace all of these with full-screen mobile design layouts and implement a standard back button in the upper left of the screen. The goals here being to address the issue of player disorientation we had seen in testing. Then, to enable faster access to content, we restructured and collapsed the IA where it made the most sense. And to improve the ergonomic design of the navigation and make it more thumb-friendly, we replaced the old filing cabinets that had been positioned in the top center of the screen, and we implemented a new sub-navigation menu situated underneath the back button, positioned at the side of the screen. Considering the game was played and held in landscape, we thought these changes aligned well with the underlying principles described in Fitts law. We were making the navigation elements easily selectable and positioning them close to our users. So, when we had a prototype that we felt was ready to share, we sent this out as a password-protected prototype to the GPF. And what is the GPF? I'm pretty sure you're all wondering. Well, this stands for Gameplay Faction. This is a group of our most highly engaged players. They are forum moderators and social media influencers, and they have the ear of many a War Dragons player. And hearing their opinions was critically important to us as we progressed with the redesign. So we gave them about a month to play around with the prototype and provide feedback. As you can see from some of the quotes, the initial early feedback we received was positive. They liked the prototype. Overall, it was considered an improved experience. The key elements seemed to resonate well, and the redesigned navigation appeared accepted. The prototype was serving its purpose and was allowing us to sound out and gauge any resistance to the new designs. Plus, we had provided our elder, most engaged players with full disclosure and super early visibility on what the team had planned for the game. They could see that we hadn't created a new alien system. The quality of life changes that we had implemented in the prototype were recognized and applauded. Now, there's one thing to note, that when we sent out the prototype, we sent it out individually to the players. They'd all signed NDAs, so they couldn't discuss with anyone except ourselves. So conversations at this stage were siloed. And we found that this enabled us to elicit a good amount of feedback from them this way. And we ensured also that this kept conversations focused. That's so worth remembering for later on. At the end of this time, we collated their comments and reviewed, and it seemed we were hitting the right chords with the most dedicated players. As we just discovered, there were no hard no's at this point, and we deemed it safe to move from the concept phase to the first engineering phase and actually begin implementation. Now, the prototype felt good to both ourselves and the GPF players. It's always easier to get a better read when designs are playable on the intended target device in a user's hands, right? So we were iterating upon the screens as we received feedback, but at this point, that had only really included some suggestions and minor tweaks here and there. Certainly, there were no major objections that should derail us from forging ahead. Now we began to concentrate upon implementing our core gameplay loops. These were the screens most touched by players and included the management and the training of their dragons, how to initiate attacks upon other players. Tackling these screens kind of like made a whole bunch of sense to us. We also didn't have a large amount of engineering resources available to us at this point, so we used the first engineering phase, as a yardstick to gauge how long screens using the redesign, the further screens, would take to implement. We definitely didn't want to overburden the engineering resources that we had available with 1,000,001 changes right from the get-go. So, consulting with the engineering team as to what was achievable in Q1, this helped define and focus the early redesign work. The backbone of the redesign components was really established within these core screens. The thinking being that once we had refactored the menus for these screens, it would be an awful lot easier and faster to implement and share assets and modules across others. And here was our consistent navigation screen, sub-navigation, and full-screen content mode beginning to take shape. As we moved into Q2 for 2018, the core screens were completed. The engineering effort shifted to the other first-level navigation screens and the events screens. Understandably, we wanted to make sure that we were using our time effectively, and our engineers identified ways to bring marked improvement to the performance of the game's UI screens in relation to their code structure. We were testing internally, and all roads pointed to a good place. So as we tackled those other key menu screens, the team was really gathering momentum. Our Dragon Rider screens were now far more accessible, as we'd surfaced their access points to the top level of our HUD by reworking the IA. In addition, we positioned the rider models front and center in a much more prominent manner, so players could now clearly enjoy their aesthetic designs. In-house guerrilla testing of the latest builds seemed to confirm that these changes were well received. We also began to update the chat screens, making sure that they adhered to the new navigation design principles too. Now, as the engineering phase 2 continued, we were allocated just a few additional resources. So we took to addressing one of the key collection of screens accessed in-game, that being the event system. So this aspect of the game features time-based events that players really got into, with the aim of being able to win new dragons and other awesome prizes. Now, our events are a key revenue driver for War Dragons, and each event runs for a time period of 3 months. Now, when we ran design reviews and heuristic evaluation for the old design, we observed that it was designed using non-mobile-friendly patterns, as you can see in the slide. We identified that it was plagued by discoverability, sequential content, and accessibility issues. And it was extremely easy to lose track of which branch of rewards a player was in whilst navigating through the content due to poor formatting. So first, we applied the core navigation structure that we had deployed elsewhere to these screens. Then we took a step back and reviewed our earlier competitor analysis, and again leveraged this to help us reach our design solution. Removed were the undersized and awkward to navigate windows previously used to display multiple content branches, and we instead messaged this via a carousel. Now, we took care to limit the number of elements for use in the carousel so as not to create unnecessary scrolling and to avoid causing player interaction fatigue. And we addressed discoverability issues via the illusion of continuity, half images, color cues, and information sent. We use large phone-friendly panels with clear imagery depicting which prizes were available, all aimed at driving player engagement time. And in here, we injected personality and visual interest to the top of the panels of each branch by using branded imagery. Content that was once spread across 18 screens could instead now be viewed and accessed in just 2. Plus, we created the icons for the branches at an increased size for far easier interaction than before. To reduce further clutter, we displayed details and information for the individual prices placed in a small pop-up which was dismissible via a close button. This set of screens alone elicited some of the most positive responses that we'd had from on-site testing. Okay, so now it was time to get the build back into our players' hands again. We were really eager to hear their thoughts, having received such encouragement previously. So we excitedly began the fourth phase, and this featured some heavy amounts of testing. So we ran on-site A/B testing, during which we gave testers the old and the new versions of the game to interact with. These testers were mobile gamers, but they hadn't yet played War Dragons. So the results unanimously pointed towards the new design being preferred by the testers. We were hearing comments like, well, this just feels more modern and better suited for a phone. And this is just easier to understand. This was awesome. We'd also been running system usability tests during the on-site testing, which resulted in solid scores, and it was clear that what we had done wasn't breaking the game. As a further means of informing and preparing the community for the incoming changes, we presented the screens via a live demo on our Facebook stream. So far, so good. I mean, what could stop us now? Clearly, we're in the home stretch, right? Actually, no. Although they had liked it initially in the wireframe and prototype phase, when we gave them access to this new restricted build, now the elder players didn't approve. This is by far the most difficult phase to get through. We clearly reminded the players they'd all participated in the feedback loop months earlier. We wanted them to understand that our changes were targeted at both new and old players alike, and we wanted them to help us understand exactly what it was that they now disliked. First, we just really wanted them to calm down. The key thing here was that we wanted the community to see and understand that we were truly listening and valuing their input. Just to illustrate the level of disdain that we witnessed in the comments we received, well, here it is on the next slide. So this was really worrying to us, as the players were hugely invested in the game, and most had been playing it since it had first come out in 2015. And here they were, rejecting the designs in high fidelity, now that they had it in their hands. Here they were rejecting the buttons. Here they were rejecting the layout changes. Here they were rejecting full screen content mode, and in places the change from horizontal to vertical roster selection. And as you can see from the quotes, some of the other elder players were threatening to quit if we released it. This was exactly what we had wanted to avoid at all costs, our elder players walking away due to the planned changes. And it was tough reading, and it certainly had the potential to become a dark time. Not quite this dark, but you get the picture. But the rejection was really worrying. Were we really going to have to drop the redesign after so much work and effort? Well, no, not so fast. We clearly had to evaluate the feedback we were receiving. If you remember, I explained earlier that during the initial prototype testing, this had been carried out in siloed discussions with individual players. Now, the elder players were testing the new build as a group, and as such, this enabled closed forum discussions to take place between themselves. This yielded very different results, very different. Having the product in their hands with these new designs was suddenly perhaps too real for some. Now, we wondered if we were having to deal with a pack mentality, and the trick here was trying to decipher what might be subjective as opposed to objective feedback that we could use to improve the product. I mean, there's absolutely no point in testing if you don't listen and act upon the feedback, right? Well, there was a lot of back and forth, and we intentionally gave them time to adapt to the design. One of our awesome product managers, thank you, Justin, was involved in direct communication via the closed forum group. And he spent a vast amount of time repeatedly explaining why we had made the choices that we did, and backed it up with examples and research. Now, while some of the players began to soften their dislike through time using the build, others continually threatened to rage quit the game if we persisted with the launch of the redesign. I mean, of course, we really were listening. It wasn't just lip service. The switch from a horizontal to a vertical roster selection for the time-sensitive pre-attack screen was a consistent source for complaints from our elder players. And that seemed to be the one main change that they absolutely refused to entertain. They were explaining that as a horizontal selection, it was easier to scan and parse the roster information quickly, which is exactly what they had to do on this particular screen. And that now they were incorrectly selecting dragons in the new vertical scheme. So we listened, evaluated their feedback, and actually in recognition, we reverted this. This was a crucial moment as the players could now see that we were not ignoring them. We also switched the matchmaking-based selection over from the right to left after hearing lots of opposition to the initial design. This particular complaint seemed to be more about change resistance, as it had been previously located on the left. However, once again, we accommodated these requests in a further iteration. Now, as we evaluated the other requests, and there were a lot that they were making, we had to balance this against development time and ask ourselves if we truly believed that these were game-breaking issues for the other players at large, or perhaps a set of personal dislikes. Once again, our phased release plan came into play. Now, although there were some emotionally fueled points being argued by the elder players, we had to consider that the previous internal testing had gone well, the on-site A/B testing and SUS scores all pointed to a more usable and improved product. We'd done our homework and based everything on best practices and established design patterns. Our research had led us to these solutions. So was this just a storm in a teacup, and should we abandon the whole redesign now? Well, we still unanimously believed as a team in the steps we had taken to measure our changes, so we decided to release to Android and get more data points. So let's remind ourselves that this was positioned as our Android test and iOS pilot prior to releasing worldwide. This was an important gate that we had to pass through. Now, once it was released to the Android community, we observed the anticipated change resistance that we had expected. But the key thing to note here is that the actual level of resistance was far less than we had been preparing ourselves for. The much-feared wash of total rejection, it didn't appear. Actually, anything but that. Sure, there were folks that didn't like it, but it didn't mirror the level of rejection we had just been going through from the elder players. And before we knew it, a few days had passed. The forums had reacted and then moved on to another topic to debate. So there was still an air of anxiety, understandably, due to the level of emotion in the elder player feedback we'd received. And although the Android release feedback contained some negativity towards the changes, we were still seeing our players continuing to engage with the game using the new designs. Well, why wasn't everyone rage quitting, as had been forewarned? And then it started getting super interesting. We switched on the in-game surveys. Then we started to receive those results, and we began to eagerly review them to find out what a mass volume of players thought of the work we had done. Talk about a feel-good factor. They weren't quitting. They were telling us they actually appreciated the change that we had made. Respondents were in their thousands. They were overwhelmingly telling us that they liked the feel of the new design. They told us they believed it was better than the previous one. And they were here confirming that access to otherwise buried content had now been surfaced and made easier to get to. Suddenly, the positive news was flowing again. Now we had hard quantitative data from our Android community. The survey results filled the team with confidence, and as we assessed the proportion of users that were encountering the problems with the new design. And if I could stay on this slide all day, I would. Okay, so the anxiety we'd experienced previously was becoming just a memory. We still had work ahead of us, but we had the really hard data from our community to back us up. And it was such a key turning point. And the team was grateful that we had held firm in our belief that we needed more data from a wider number of players. We relayed the findings back to the elder players, and it was really pleasing to see that on the whole, they accepted this. We gave them full disclosure into the questions we had asked and the level range of players that we had asked these to. As we approached the full worldwide release, we tackled some last remaining issues. We are really aware that loading times for certain sections were far too long, so we targeted this as an area to improve. Additionally, we refreshed the prizes and ranked screens with a new visual direction and continued the rollout of the sidebar navigation. The community reaction to these changes was unanimously positive. Even the key elder players got on board with this. So then it was time to finally let it run in the wild. We'd done that. We are, of course, a free-to-play game. That means that we aim to do things that can help improve our metrics from a business perspective. Well, the improvements we saw in our metrics were fantastic. There was a 30% increase in player time spent in the game. There was a 27% ARPDAU increase. There was a 10% early player retention increase. Frame rate also improved significantly, which is kudos to our engineers. They've done an awesome job refactoring the screens. Reason to celebrate. So are we finished? Well, today there is still a dedicated and active worldwide community who, including those elder players, that are still playing War Dragons. The team continue to bring improvements to the existing features on a regular basis as we listen and refine and help where we can. It's certainly true that a game evolves over time, and so do the players and their needs. And we definitely have a belief that it's a marathon, not a sprint, that mentality for supporting a live product. So learnings, well, establishing and defining a product vision is essential. Researching and identifying the design patterns to use made achieving team alignment an awful lot easier and helped focus our workload. A staged rollout enabled the team to constantly receive validation, be that from the prototype stage to the full worldwide release. It was a plan that allowed us to execute with no issues. Involve the community as much as you can and do exercise sound judgment in evaluating their feedback. Get to understand your players and bring them along with you on the ride. Iterate and user test tirelessly. Utilize both qualitative and quantitative data alongside all of the aforementioned to assist you in your decision-making process. And perhaps the most critical one for me, believe in your team. Thank you. I think we've got time for any questions if anybody wants. The microphones? Hi.
Yeah, how's it going? Can you talk about how lifetime value of those elder players contributed to your decisions about what you would and wouldn't accept? I have no idea what they actually were contributing, but if you found that really they're bringing in all the money, ultimately, would you have completely scrapped the entire design if, at the end of the day,
they definitely were influencing our revenue, yes. You know, they did get on board, like I say. It was an extremely delicate balancing act that we had to do. So, you know, that's why we consulted them first and foremost. The GPF, the elder players, there was around 10 to 15 people right at the beginning. Because they are so ingrained in the Dragons community, we felt that that was just like a really solid place to go and consult with. So, yeah, I mean, it was a happy story, right? Yeah.
Hi. You spoke a little bit about how the community received your game changes differently compared to when they were shown in wireframes and prototypes and then when they were shown as a group. Could you explain a little bit more about why you believe that differed? Is it because of the group mentality and maybe they had friends who were affecting their opinion? Or?
You mean, do I have a hypothesis as to why it was so different when they received it? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that they were siloed conversations to begin with meant that they weren't sharing, you know, and discussing with anybody else there. And it did just keep it completely focused. Yeah. And then just the very fact that, you know, they were all together as a group. I don't know if it's just this natural reaction of one person saying, well, I don't really like this anymore, and other people jumping onto that, you know, onto that particular argument. That was what we saw.
Okay, thank you.
So you had metrics up there that showed an uplift in your ARPDAU and your engagement, but you're still supporting a live game. So how did you tie those metrics directly to the redesign?
Well, that's the part of the vision that we established at the beginning. Yeah, we definitely were trying to look at increased frame rate through refactoring of our code. We knew that you know, it was a disorientation issue that we'd witnessed in testing with new players. So we felt strongly that, like, by redoing the navigation, that we would actually improve early player retention, which is exactly what we saw. Yeah. And then what was the last one? I can't remember now. Sorry, my brain has blanked on me. ARPDAU, yeah. I think we got lucky there more than anything, you know. I mean, the fact that players stayed in the game more time now, you know, like a 30% increase of actual time spent in the game, there's 30% more time for them to actually spend something, yeah? Does that make sense? Sure. Okay. Hello.
Hello. I'm just wondering, do you think it would have relieved some of the anxiety of rejection from the larger community if you had, even though like the elder players, like their opinions are definitely like very important because they know what they want from the game, but if you had also involved like maybe a group of slightly newer players.
Sure. Well, I mean, we did do this. You know, you could see through the stages that we had. You know, we brought people on site who were new to get their feedback. That was all evaluated there from the on-site testing. You know, and then obviously sharing it via the Facebook live stream as well. That was for everybody to see, right? It wasn't just the elder players. So we did try to make sure that the community had visibility, but it was key for us, as I say, just to get that elder player buy-in because they were like basically social media influencers for Dragons, yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, quick question. You had mentioned at some point that you use navigation principles when designing. Just wanted you to go over what navigation principles you mean by that.
Well, we used our competitive research to see what other successful mobile design patterns we saw. And the one thing that we saw that was like, a really repeating motif was the consistent navigation, the back button, the sub-navigation where things are in your ergonomic thumb range, yeah? Because the game had been created in 2015 and it really wasn't built with like, solid mobile design principles, in practice. And that's what we tried to do. I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you.